The ballroom fell silent the instant he spoke. Dance with her? The Duke of Ashford's voice carried across marble floors, dripping with such contempt that even the violin seemed to pause. I would sooner waltz with a footstool. Laughter erupted, cruel, vicious, echoing off crystal chandeliers. Lady Clara Whitmore stood frozen in her pale blue gown, every eye in London society drinking in her humiliation. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this moment would ignite a transformation so complete, so devastating, that 5 years later, this same room would hold its breath at the mere mention of her name. Stay with us until the very end to witness how a woman they called plain became the most powerful force London had ever seen. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The gaslight flickered against the Whitmore townhouse windows as Clara descended the stairs that October evening in 1868, her gloved hands trembling slightly on the banister. At 23, she had attended precisely 47 balls, and not once had her dance card been filled. Not once had a gentleman sought her company for more than the briefest courtesy required by social obligation. "Do try not to embarrass us tonight," her stepmother, Victoria, had said while adjusting her own emerald necklace in the mirror. "Though I suppose that's rather like asking the rain not to fall." Clara had learned long ago not to respond to such barbs. Victoria Whitmore had married Clara's father 3 years after her mother's death, and from the first day she had made it clear that Clara's very existence was an inconvenience. Where Victoria was all golden curls and rosebud lips, Clara was dark-haired and angular, with eyes too large for her face and a mouth too wide for classical beauty. The society papers had once described her as pleasantly unremarkable, which was perhaps the kindest assessment she'd ever received. The Ashford Ball was the pinnacle of the autumn season. The Duke of Ashford himself, 30 years old, devastatingly handsome, and in possession of one of England's largest fortunes, was rumored to be finally seeking a wife. Every eligible woman in London had angled for an invitation, and somehow, through her father's business connections, Clara had secured one. Not that it mattered. She knew why she was really there. "You will make yourself available to Lord Pemberton," her father, Gerald Whitmore, had instructed that morning. "He's shown interest in a business partnership, and a connection to our family through marriage would seal the arrangement." Lord Pemberton was 62, a widower with 4 grown children and a reputation for favoring very young wives. The thought made Clara's stomach turn, but she had learned that her opinions on her own future held approximately as much weight as a servant's might on the household menu. The ballroom at Ashford House was a masterpiece of excess. 3 massive crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across floors polished to mirror brightness. Hothouse flowers, roses, lilies, orchids, spilled from enormous vases, their perfume heavy in the warm air. Women in silk and satin glided past in a rainbow of jewel tones, their jewelry catching the light like captured stars. The orchestra played from a raised dais, and footmen in pristine livery circulated with champagne and delicacies. Clara felt like a wren in a garden of peacocks. "Lady Clara!" A familiar voice cut through the music, and she turned to see Beatrice Crawford, one of the few women who had ever shown her genuine kindness. Beatrice was pretty in a conventional way, blonde, petite, with the kind of sweet disposition that made everyone love her. "I was hoping you'd be here. Isn't it magnificent?" "It's certainly impressive," Clara agreed, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing footman, more for something to do with her hands than any desire to drink it. "Have you seen the Duke yet?" Beatrice lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He's even more handsome than the gossip columns suggest. Though I hear he's terribly exacting. Lady Pembroke was just telling me he sent back 3 separate proposals for the floral arrangements before he approved them. A man who knows what he wants, apparently. Or a man who's impossible to please." Beatrice giggled, then sobered slightly. "Though I suppose when you have that much money and that much influence, you can afford to be particular about everything, including—" She trailed off, her eyes scanning the room meaningfully. "Including a wife," Clara finished silently. "The Duke would choose someone perfect, someone beautiful, accomplished, from an impeccable family. Someone as far from Clara Whitmore as it was possible to be while still inhabiting the same species." "Clara!" Her stepmother's voice was sharp. Victoria appeared at her elbow, her smile brittle and false. "Lord Pemberton is asking for you. Do try to be charming." Beatrice squeezed Clara's hand sympathetically before melting back into the crowd. Clara straightened her spine and followed Victoria through the press of bodies toward where Lord Pemberton stood near one of the flower arrangements, his jowls quivering as he laughed at something another gentleman had said. "Ah, Lady Clara." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're looking well this evening." It was a lie, but a polite one. Her dress, a pale blue silk that Victoria had insisted was suitable for someone of her appearance, did nothing for her complexion and was at least 2 seasons out of fashion. But Clara had learned to accept such compliments with gracious neutrality. "You're very kind, Lord Pemberton. I was just telling Lord Hartley here about the property I acquired in Surrey. Magnificent hunting grounds. Perhaps you might like to see them sometime. With a proper chaperone, of course." The implication was clear. Clara was being interviewed, assessed, measured for the role of his next wife like a piece of furniture being considered for a room. She opened her mouth to give some non-committal response when a ripple of energy passed through the ballroom. The Duke of Ashford had entered. He was, Clara had to admit, extraordinarily handsome. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Strong jaw, straight nose, intense eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He moved through the room with the unconscious grace of someone who had never doubted his right to be anywhere, and the crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. "Magnificent specimen," Lord Pemberton muttered, "though I hear his temperament is rather difficult. Dismissed 3 secretaries last month alone." Clara watched as the Duke greeted various guests, his smile polite but never quite reaching his eyes. There was something cold about him, something that suggested the warmth of genuine emotion was foreign territory. When he laughed at a joke, it seemed calculated rather than spontaneous. When he bowed over a lady's hand, it was with perfect form but no real interest. He was, Clara thought, probably the loneliest person in the room. The evening progressed in its predictable pattern. Clara danced twice with Lord Pemberton, his hands uncomfortably possessive on her waist, and once with a nervous young baron who apologized 3 times for stepping on her hem. Between dances, she stood with the other wallflowers, watching the glittering spectacle and trying not to think about how this was likely to be her life. An endless succession of balls where she would never quite belong, until finally her father's patience ran out and she found herself shackled to someone like Pemberton. It was nearly midnight when disaster struck. Clara had retreated to a quieter corner of the ballroom, near the terrace doors where the air was slightly cooler and the noise less overwhelming. She was standing alone, observing a particularly elaborate quadrille, when she felt a presence beside her. "Lady Clara Whitmore?" She turned to find the Duke of Ashford himself standing there, and for a moment her breath caught. Up close he was even more imposing, not just his physical presence, but the sheer force of his personality, the weight of his attention. "Your Grace," she curtsied, her heart suddenly racing. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." His voice was deep, cultured, with an edge of something she couldn't quite identify. "Though I've heard your father speak highly of his daughter." "You know my father?" "We've had some business dealings. He's a shrewd negotiator." The Duke's eyes traveled over her, and she saw the exact moment he catalogued and dismissed her. It was there in the slight flicker of his gaze, the minute tightening around his mouth. "I understand you're not engaged." "No, Your Grace. And you're... how old?" The question was borderline rude, but Clara answered anyway. 23. "I see." Something that might have been pity crossed his face, and Clara felt her cheeks burn. 23 and unmarried was decidedly on the shelf, especially for someone without beauty or fortune to recommend her. "Well, I'm sure the right match will come along eventually." It was dismissive, patronizing, and it stung more than Clara wanted to admit. But she maintained her composure, her voice steady as she replied, "You're very kind to say so, Your Grace." He had already lost interest, his gaze drifting back to the dancers. But then Lord Hartley appeared, slightly drunk and jovial, clapping the Duke on the shoulder. "Ashford, there you are. We were just wagering on whether you'd actually dance tonight. Lady Pembroke has put £50 on yes, and Lord Morrison is taking the opposite position." The Duke's expression turned sardonic. "I'm not a performing monkey, Hartley. Come now, it's your ball. You must dance at least once. Why, there's a perfectly lovely partner right here." Hartley gestured expansively toward Clara, and she wanted to sink through the floor. Lady Clara, the Duke would be honored to have this dance, wouldn't you, Ashford? The silence that followed was excruciating. Clara watched the Duke's face, saw the exact moment he weighed his options, cause a scene by refusing outright, or endure a single dance with someone beneath his notice. And she saw when he made his decision, saw the cold calculation in his eyes. Dance with her? The words were loud enough to carry. Around them, conversations faltered and died. Heads turned. I would sooner waltz with a footstool. The laughter started immediately, first from Hartley, then rippling outward like poison through water. Someone nearby whispered loudly enough for Clara to hear. Well, she does rather resemble one, doesn't she? All square and plain. More laughter. Clara stood frozen, her face burning, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms through her gloves. The Duke had already turned away, dismissing her, but the damage was complete and absolute. Every eye in the ballroom was on her, every whispered comment dissecting her humiliation. Victoria appeared, her face tight with fury, not at Clara's behalf, but at the scandal of it. Come, she hissed, gripping Clara's arm hard enough to bruise. You've embarrassed us enough for one evening. Clara let herself be led away, her vision blurring. Behind her, the orchestra resumed playing, the ball continuing as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just been publicly shredded in front of everyone who mattered in London society. In the carriage ride home, Victoria unleashed her venom. Do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea at all? The Duke of Ashford, of all the people to make a fool of yourself in front of. I didn't, Clara started, but Victoria cut her off. Lord Pemberton has withdrawn his interest. He sent a note to your father before we even left. Said he couldn't possibly align himself with a family that had been so publicly humiliated. Victoria's eyes were like chips of ice. You've ruined everything we've worked toward. Clara wanted to point out that she hadn't asked Hartley to suggest the dance, hadn't done anything except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. But she knew it wouldn't matter. In Victoria's eyes, in everyone's eyes, she was guilty of the crime of being unworthy, and that was punishment enough. The townhouse was dark when they arrived. Clara fled to her room, finally allowing the tears to come. She cried for the humiliation, yes, but more for the futility of it all. What was the point? What was the point of trying to fit into a world that had decided from birth that she didn't belong? She was still awake when dawn broke, staring at the ceiling, when she heard the argument downstairs. Cannot continue like this. That was Victoria's voice, shrill with anger. She's a millstone around our necks. Every time we make progress, she ruins it. She's my daughter. Her father's voice was weaker, defensive. She's a liability, and I have a solution. Clara crept to her door, opening it a crack to hear better. The cottage in Northumberland, Victoria continued. It's been sitting empty for years. We could send her there. Tell society she's gone to care for an elderly relative or has taken ill or anything. Just get her out of London before she does any more damage. That's exile, Victoria. That's sending her away to nothing. It's a mercy. Can you imagine what the gossip columns will say tomorrow? What Lady Pembroke and her ilk will be whispering over tea? Clara's presence here is poison. At least in Northumberland, she can live quietly, out of sight, and we can try to salvage what's left of our reputation. There was a long pause. Then her father spoke, and Clara felt something inside her crack and break. Very well. Make the arrangements. Clara closed her door silently and returned to her bed. She didn't cry again. There were no tears left for this betrayal, this final proof that she had never really been wanted at all. The next morning, Victoria appeared in her room before breakfast, her face triumphant. You're leaving for Northumberland in 3 days. The cottage is yours, along with a small stipend. It's more than generous, considering. She paused, her smile cruel. You should thank me, really. Up there, you won't have to face the consequences of your actions. You can hide away where no one will ever have to look at you again. And if I refuse, Clara's voice was hoarse from crying, then your father will cut you off entirely. No money, no home, no references. You'll end up in the workhouse, or worse. Victoria smoothed her skirts. The choice is yours, of course. But we both know what you'll choose. You've never been brave enough to choose anything else. After she left, Clara sat very still, her mind racing. The cottage in Northumberland. She remembered it vaguely from childhood visits before her mother died. Stone walls, cliffs, the constant sound of the sea. Isolated. Empty. A prison disguised as refuge. But something was stirring inside her, something that felt almost like relief. London had never wanted her. Society had never accepted her. She had spent 23 years trying to squeeze herself into a mold that was never designed to fit her shape. And what had it gotten her? Humiliation, dismissal, cruelty. Maybe exile wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was permission. Over the next 3 days, Clara began to plan. She sold several of her gowns, the ones Victoria had insisted she wear, the ones designed to make her invisible, to a second-hand shop, pocketing the money. She packed her books, her mother's jewelry, the few things that actually mattered to her. And she made a vow, there in her London bedroom, that she whispered to her reflection in the mirror, "If they're sending me away to disappear, I'll disappear. But if I ever come back, it won't be as the girl they erased. It will be as someone they can't forget." The morning she left, her father came to her room. He looked older somehow, diminished. "Clara, this isn't what I wanted. Isn't it?" She kept her voice level, emotionless. "Victoria convinced me it was for the best, that you'd be happier away from all this." "Away from all this," Clara repeated. "You mean away from you, away from the embarrassment of having a daughter who isn't beautiful enough or graceful enough or valuable enough to be worth keeping? That's not fair." "No," Clara agreed, picking up her traveling case. "It's not." The journey north took 3 days by train and coach. With each mile that passed, London, with its glittering ballrooms and cruel whispers, receded further behind her. The landscape changed from manicured estates to wild moors, from tame gardens to windswept hills. The air grew sharper, the sky wider, the horizon more distant. When she finally arrived at the cottage, twilight was falling. The coachman who'd brought her from the nearest village looked at the small stone building perched on the cliff's edge and frowned. "You sure about this, miss? It's mighty isolated out here. Nearest neighbors are 5 miles away in Whitby." "I'm sure," Clara said, climbing down. She paid him from her dwindling funds and watched as he drove away, leaving her alone with the sound of the wind and the distant crash of waves. The cottage was small. 2 rooms downstairs, 2 up. Stone floors, whitewashed walls, furniture covered in dust sheets. But the bones of it were solid, and when Clara lit a fire in the grate, warmth began to spread through the space. She stood at the window looking out at the wild North Sea stretching endlessly before her, and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Freedom. For the first time in her life, there was no one watching her, judging her, finding her wanting. No one to tell her how to dress, how to speak, how to be. No balls to attend, no suitors to endure, no stepmother's venom to dodge. Just the cliff, the sea, an infinite possibility. That first night, Clara slept better than she had in years. And when she woke the next morning to pale sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of gulls crying over the water, she began her transformation. It started small. She unpacked her books, volumes on philosophy, science, poetry, that Victoria had deemed unsuitable for a lady. She read voraciously, sometimes finishing an entire book in a day, her mind hungry for the ideas she'd been denied in London. She walked the cliffs, letting the wind whip her hair from its pins, not caring that her skin darkened from the sun, that her hands grew rough from work. She taught herself to cook more than the basics, to mend her own clothes, to manage the cottage's tiny budget. The stipend Victoria sent was barely enough to survive on, but Clara made it work through sheer determination. 3 months into her exile, she walked into Whitby village for supplies and saw a group of children huddled outside the church. They were thin, dirty, with the hollow-eyed look of poverty. When she asked the shopkeeper about them, he shrugged. "Orphans, most of them, or as good as. Workhouse won't take any more, and their folks can't feed 'em. They beg or steal to survive." Clara looked at those children and saw herself, unwanted, dismissed, erased, and she made a decision. "Can any of them read?" The shopkeeper laughed. "Read? Miss, these are fishermen's children, and worse, What would they need reading for? Everything, Clara said quietly. She started with 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, aged 7 to 10. She taught them in her cottage's main room, using her own books, writing lessons in chalk on a slate she'd bought with money from selling another gown. They were wary at first, suspicious of this strange London lady who'd appeared in their village. But Clara was patient, and slowly they began to trust her. Word spread. More children came. Then their mothers, asking if Clara might teach them too. Within 6 months, Clara's cottage school had 15 students, ranging in age from 5 to 40. She had no official permission, no credentials, no support from the local gentry. But she had something more powerful, a purpose. For the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore mattered, not because of her family name or her appearance or her prospects for marriage, but because of what she could do, what she could give. The first year was brutal. There were days when the money ran out entirely, when she went hungry so her students could have bread. Days when the isolation threatened to swallow her whole, when she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Days when letters from London, rare and cold, reminded her that her father's health was failing and Victoria was consolidating her power over the estate. But Clara didn't break. She bent, certainly. She weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. But she didn't break. By the end of the second year, her school had 30 students. She'd convinced the village vicar to donate an unused barn for classes. She'd started teaching not just reading and writing, but arithmetic, geography, basic science. Some of her older students were learning Latin. The local gentry heard about her, of course. Lady Pemberton, a different Pemberton, a distant cousin of the lord who'd rejected Clara, came to visit, expecting to find some pathetic charity case she could patronize. Instead, she found a woman transformed. Clara greeted her visitor wearing a simple wool dress she'd made herself, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her hands ink-stained from preparing lessons. She was thinner than she'd been in London, her skin darker from sun and wind, lines beginning to form at the corners of her eyes from squinting against the coastal light. She looked nothing like the timid girl who'd been humiliated at the Ashford ball. "Lady Pemberton," Clara said, her voice steady and clear. "Welcome. Would you like to observe a lesson?" Lady Pemberton did observe. She watched Clara teach a class of mixed-age students, saw how they hung on her words, how they raced to answer her questions, how they looked at her with something that could only be called devotion. Afterward, over tea in the cottage, Lady Pemberton was uncharacteristically quiet. "You've done something remarkable here," she finally said. "I've done what needed to be done. The village speaks very highly of you. They say you've changed their children's futures." Clara smiled slightly. "The children changed their own futures. I just gave them tools." Lady Pemberton left, but she returned 2 weeks later with a donation, enough money to keep the school running for 3 months. She also brought news from London. "Your father is quite ill," she said carefully. "Consumption. The doctors don't give him long." Clara absorbed this information with less pain than she'd expected. "I see. Will you return?" "Why would I?" "He's your father, and, well, there will be the matter of the estate, the will." "Victoria can have it all," Clara said flatly. "I want nothing from London." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 4 years and 8 months after Clara's exile began, a letter arrived from her father's solicitor. Gerald Whitmore had died, and Clara was summoned to London for the reading of the will. She almost refused. The Clara who had arrived at this cottage broken and humiliated would have refused. But the Clara who stood at the cliff's edge that evening, watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of fire, was different. She thought of her students, of the school that had become her life's work. She thought of the whispers that had followed her from London, the dismissal, the cruelty. She thought of the Duke of Ashford's voice, "I would sooner waltz with a footstool." And she smiled. "All right," she said to the empty air. "I'll go back, but not as the girl they remember." She wrote letters to Lady Pemberton and the vicar, arranging for the school to continue in her absence. She packed carefully, not the fancy gowns of her youth, but simple, well-made dresses that reflected who she'd become. She gathered her books, her notes, evidence of everything she'd built. The night before she left, she stood in front of her mirror for the first time in years, really looking at herself. The girl who'd left London was gone completely. In her place stood a woman of 28, lean and strong from years of physical work. Her face was weathered but alive with intelligence and purpose. Her hands were calloused but capable. Her eyes, those two large eyes that had once seemed like a flaw, now blazed with conviction. "They wanted me to disappear," she told her reflection. "They wanted to erase me." She picked up a small box containing the only piece of jewelry she'd kept from her London life, her mother's pearl necklace. Let's show them what they actually created instead. The journey south felt different than the journey north had been. Then, she'd been fleeing. Now, she was returning. Then, she'd been a victim. Now, she was something else entirely, something they would remember. The train pulled into King's Cross Station on a gray October morning, and Clara stepped onto the platform. London smelled the same, coal smoke and horse dung, and too many people crowded too close together. But she was different, and that made all the difference. She hired a hansom cab to take her to the solicitor's office, watching the familiar streets roll past. How small it all seemed now. How insignificant. These streets that had once defined her entire world were just streets. These buildings where she'd been judged and found wanting were just buildings. She'd built a school with less resources than any of these establishments possessed. She'd changed lives. She'd mattered. And now she was back, not to beg for acceptance, but to bury the past once and for all. The solicitor, Mr. Davison, looked surprised when she was shown into his office. "Lady Clara, I hardly recognized you." "I imagine not." She sat without waiting to be invited, her posture straight but relaxed. "Shall we proceed?" The will was straightforward. Gerald had left the London townhouse and most of his liquid assets to Victoria, but he'd also left Clara a sum of £10,000, a significant fortune, and a letter. Clara opened it there in the office, her hands steady. "My daughter, if you're reading this, I am gone, and I can no longer correct the wrongs I did you. I allowed Victoria to send you away because I was weak, because I valued peace over principle. I told myself it was for your own good, but the truth is simpler and more shameful. I was afraid of the scandal, afraid of the whispers, afraid to defend you. The money I leave you is not compensation. Nothing could compensate for those lost years. But I hope it gives you freedom to continue whatever life you've built for yourself. Lady Pemberton has written to me about your school, about the remarkable work you're doing. I am proud of you, though I have no right to be. I was a coward, Clara. You were always braver than I. Your father?" Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in her reticule. Around her, Mr. Davison was explaining various legal technicalities, but she barely heard him. £10,000. With that money, she could expand the school, buy proper supplies, hire teachers, change hundreds of lives. "There's one more thing," Mr. Davison said, pulling her attention back. "Your father's memorial service is scheduled for tomorrow evening. It will be at the Ashford townhouse. The Duke has generously offered to host it, given his business relationship with your father." Of course. Of course it would be at Ashford House. The universe had a twisted sense of poetry. "I'll be there," Clara said. That night, alone in a hotel room, Clara prepared for battle. She chose her simplest dress, dark gray wool, well cut but unadorned. She pulled her hair back in the same practical style she wore at the school. She put on her mother's pearls, the only concession to ornamentation. When she looked in his mirror, she saw not a society lady, but a woman of substance, a woman who had built something real with her own hands and her own will. Perfect. The memorial service was smaller than Clara expected. Her father hadn't been important enough to draw a real crowd, and most of London's elite were at their country estates for the autumn. But everyone who mattered was there. Victoria, draped in widow's weeds despite having shown no love for her husband in life, Lady Pembroke and her circle of gossips, various business associates, and standing near the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking older but no less imposing, the Duke of Ashford. Their eyes met across the room, and Clara saw recognition flicker, then confusion, then something that might have been shock. He didn't know her. How could he? The plain, timid girl he'd publicly humiliated was nowhere in evidence. In her place stood someone he'd never expected to see again. Clara smiled, small and cold, and turned away to accept condolences from people who had never cared about her father or her. The memorial proceeded with appropriate solemnity. Various men stood to give brief speeches about Gerald Whitmore's business acumen, his contributions to various ventures, his respected position in the community. It was all very polite, very proper, very false. Clara sat in the second row, listening, her expression neutral. And as the speeches droned on, as the hypocrisy piled higher and higher, she felt something crystallize inside her. These people, these same people who had watched her humiliation 5 years ago and done nothing, who had whispered and laughed and then forgotten her entirely, they were about to remember her. When the last speaker finished and people began to rise, assuming the service was over, Clara stood. "If I may," she said clearly, and the room fell silent. Victoria's face went white, then red. "Clara, this is hardly appropriate. My father is dead," Clara interrupted, her voice carrying across the room. "I think I'm entitled to a few words." She walked to the front of the room, aware of every eye on her, aware of the whispers starting. She positioned herself near the fireplace, where the light would fall on her face, and began to speak. And with her first words, she set fire to the world that had tried to erase her. "My father," Clara began, her voice steady and clear in the hushed room, "was a man of contradictions." Victoria started to rise, her face twisted with fury, but Lady Pembroke placed a restraining hand on her arm. The room remained silent, every eye fixed on Clara. He built a fortune through shrewd business decisions, yet he couldn't make the simple choice to defend his own daughter. He commanded respect in boardrooms across London, yet he surrendered his household to cruelty and cowardice. Clara's gaze swept across the assembled guests, landing briefly on each face that had witnessed her humiliation 5 years ago. "He taught me many things, though not the lessons he intended." She could see the confusion in their expressions, the dawning recognition that this was not going to be a typical memorial speech. The Duke of Ashford had straightened from his casual lean against the mantel, his whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips. "My father taught me that society's approval is conditional and therefore worthless. That beauty, as defined by people in rooms like this, is merely another currency to be traded and devalued at whim. That a woman's worth is measured not by her character or her mind, but by whether she can enhance a man's reputation or drain it." "This is outrageous," Victoria hissed, but her voice lacked its usual venom. She looked frightened. Clara ignored her. 5 years ago, I stood in this very house, in the ballroom just beyond those doors, and I was publicly humiliated. I was compared to furniture, dismissed as unworthy of even basic courtesy, and you all watched. Some of you laughed. Most of you simply looked away, as if my pain was something distasteful to be ignored. The Duke's face had gone pale. She saw his hand tighten around his glass, saw the muscle working in his jaw. I was sent away, exiled really, to a cottage on the Northumberland coast. My stepmother told me I was being removed before I could cause further embarrassment. My father, weak as he was, agreed. And do you know what I did there? In that isolation you all believed would erase me? No one answered. The silence was absolute. I built a school. With my own hands and what little money I could scrape together, I created something that matters. 30 children who would have grown up illiterate now read Shakespeare and solve complex mathematics. Women who believed their lives held no possibility beyond drudgery now teach their own children. A community that had been written off as worthless now has hope. Clara's voice grew stronger, fueled by 5 years of survival and triumph. I did this without your approval, without your money, without your society. And in doing so, I learned the most valuable lesson my father never intended to teach me, that your judgment is meaningless. Your cruelty is powerless. Your definitions of worth are as empty as the praise you're all preparing to heap on a dead man who couldn't protect his own child. How dare you! Victoria was on her feet now, her carefully composed widow's mask shattered. Your father gave you everything, a home, an education, opportunities that girls of far better character would kill for. He gave me survival, Clara corrected coldly, and then he took even that away when it became inconvenient. But I'm not here to condemn him. He's dead, and whatever peace he's found, I hope it's more than he gave me in life. She turned to face the assembled crowd directly. I'm here because I want you all to see what you tried to destroy. I want you to look at the woman you dismissed as plain and worthless and unsuitable, and I want you to understand that your opinion never mattered. Not then, not now, not ever. The room erupted. Half a dozen voices rose in indignation, in shock, in anger. Victoria was shrieking something about disgrace and ingratitude. Lady Pembroke's fan fluttered so rapidly it created a small wind. The business associates looked at each other in confusion, uncertain whether to be scandalized or impressed. And through it all, Clara stood perfectly still, her head high, her expression serene. Until the Duke of Ashford spoke. "Enough!" His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The room fell silent again. He set down his glass with deliberate care and took a step forward. "Lady Clara is correct. We did fail her. I failed her, most egregiously of all." Clara's eyes snapped to his face, searching for mockery, for another trap. But what she saw there was something she didn't expect. Shame. 5 years ago, the Duke continued, his voice rough, I said something unconscionably cruel to this woman. I did it because Lord Hartley had put me in an uncomfortable position, and I chose my own comfort over basic decency. I chose to humiliate someone who had done nothing to deserve it, simply because I could. He looked directly at Clara, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never expected to see from him. Genuine remorse. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count. I have regretted it every day since. And I have never had the courage to seek you out and apologize because I know, that an apology is inadequate for the damage I caused. Clara felt something shift in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. You're right, she said quietly. An apology is inadequate, but at least you have the decency to admit your failure. That's more than most in this room can claim. That's quite enough, Victoria snapped, finding her voice again. This spectacle has gone on long enough. Clara, you will leave immediately, collect whatever pitiful inheritance your father left you, and return to your little hovel in the north. You are not welcome here. Actually, Mr. Davison the solicitor interjected nervously from the back of the room. Lady Clara has every right to be here. And regarding the inheritance, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue. The inheritance, Victoria said with venomous satisfaction, amounts to pocket change. £10,000, barely enough to keep her in candles at that pathetic school of hers. Meanwhile, everything else, the townhouse, the investments, the real money, belongs to me. £10,000, Clara repeated slowly, and then she smiled. It was not a kind smile. You think that's pocket change? You think that's pathetic? She laughed, and the sound was sharp as broken glass. With £10,000, I can build a proper school building. I can hire 3 teachers. I can buy books and supplies for 500 students. I can change an entire region's future. She stepped closer to Victoria, her voice dropping to something dangerous. You've just given me more power than you can possibly imagine, and you're too ignorant to even realize it. Victoria's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. You ungrateful little— I'm not ungrateful, Clara interrupted. I'm liberated, and now, if you'll all excuse me, I have a school to run and a life to live. A real life, not the hollow performance you all engage in here. She turned toward the door, ready to leave this place and these people behind forever. But the Duke's voice stopped her. Wait. Clara paused but didn't turn around. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, he said, and something in his tone made her look back despite herself. But I would very much like to hear more about this school of yours. About the work you're doing. Why? Clara asked bluntly. So you can soothe your conscience by appearing interested in charity work? So you can tell your friends at the club that you're supporting education for the poor? No. He met her gaze steadily. Because I think you're doing something important and because I would like to help, if you'll permit it. I don't need your help. Perhaps not. But the children you teach might benefit from it. And if you'll allow me to make even a small amends for my past cruelty, I would be grateful for the opportunity. Clara studied him for a long moment. 5 years ago, she would have leaped at such an offer, desperate for any scrap of approval from someone like him. But the woman she'd become saw the situation more clearly. I'll think about it, she said finally. But understand this, Your Grace. If you're looking for absolution, you won't find it from me. And if you're looking for a charitable cause to make yourself feel important, find another one. My school doesn't exist to rehabilitate your reputation. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or respect. Understood. Clara left then, walking out of Ashford House with her head high and her purpose clear. Behind her, she could hear Victoria's voice rising in fresh hysteria, the scandalized whispers of the guests, the chaos she'd deliberately created. Good. Let them talk, let them spin their gossip and clutch their pearls. She had real work to do. The next morning, Clara met with Mr. Davison to finalize the inheritance paperwork. The solicitor was nervous, clearly worried about the previous evening's dramatic scene. I must say, Lady Clara, your speech was quite unexpected. I imagine it was. Clara signed the documents with steady hands. Tell me, Mr. Davison, did my father leave any instructions regarding how the money should be used? No specific instructions, no. It's yours to use as you see fit. He hesitated. Though I should mention that your stepmother has already begun spreading rather unflattering rumors about your mental state. She's suggesting that the isolation in Northumberland has affected your judgment. Clara laughed. Of course she is, and how is society responding? Mixed reactions, I'm afraid. Some are scandalized by your behavior last night. Others— He pulled out a newspaper and slid it across the desk. Others are intrigued. The headline made Clara blink. Mystery Woman's Memorial Outburst. Exile returns with shocking accusations. The article, written in breathless prose, detailed her speech and speculated wildly about her years in Northumberland. But what caught Clara's attention was a quote near the end, attributed to Lady Pemberton of Northumberland. Lady Clara Whitmore is the most remarkable woman I have ever met. Her school has transformed our entire region. She has given hope to those who had none, education to those who were deemed unworthy of it, and dignity to the forgotten. If London society cannot see her value, that speaks to London's blindness, not Lady Clara's worth. Well, Clara said softly, that's unexpected. Over the next 3 days, several things happened in rapid succession. First, Victoria attempted to have Clara declared mentally incompetent and the inheritance challenged. The petition was dismissed almost immediately when 3 separate character witnesses, including Lady Pemberton and the Whitby vicar, submitted detailed testimonials about Clara's exceptional work and sound judgment. Second, reporters began appearing at Clara's hotel, seeking interviews about the scandalous memorial speech. Clara refused them all, which only increased their interest. Third, and most surprisingly, donations began arriving. Small amounts at first, £5 here, 10 there, from women who had read about the school and wanted to support it. Then larger sums from people Clara had never heard of, people who seemed moved by the idea of education for those society had written off. And fourth, the Duke of Ashford sent a letter. Clara held the cream-colored envelope for several minutes before opening it, half expecting another insult disguised as courtesy. But what she found inside was something else entirely. Lady Clara, I write not to seek forgiveness, as you made clear you have none to give, but to make a concrete offer. I own several properties in Northumberland, including a large estate near Durham that has sat empty for 2 years. The main house could easily accommodate 100 students, with multiple outbuildings suitable for workshops, laboratories, and housing for teachers. I would like to deed this property to your school, no strings attached. You would have complete autonomy over its use and management. I ask nothing in return except permission to occasionally visit and observe the work being done. Not to interfere, but to learn. I know you have every reason to refuse this offer. I know you suspect my motives. All I can say is that I have spent 5 years recognizing the emptiness of the life I lead, the hollowness of accomplishments that benefit only myself and people like me. You called us out for our hypocrisy, and you were right to do so. I cannot undo the past, but perhaps I can help build a different future. Respectfully, James Ashford. Clara read the letter 3 times, looking for the trap, the hidden cost, the inevitable betrayal. But the offer seemed genuine. An entire estate, buildings, land, resources that would multiply her school's impact 100-fold. She should refuse it. She should tear up the letter and return to Northumberland with her inheritance, build what she could build on her own terms. Taking help from the man who had humiliated her would be, what? Weakness, compromise. Or would it be strength, the strength to put her students' needs above her pride? Clara stared out her hotel window at the London streets below, wrestling with the decision. Finally, she picked up her pen and wrote a reply. Your Grace, I will accept your offer on the following conditions. First, the deed must be transferred entirely and irrevocably to a trust established for the school, with myself and 2 other trustees as administrators. You will have no legal claim on the property. Second, any visit you make must be announced in advance and may be refused if it interferes with the school's operations. Third, you will make no public statements about your donation. This is not about your reputation. If I discover you're using the school to rehabilitate your image, the arrangement ends immediately. If these terms are acceptable, I will meet with you and your solicitor to finalize the transfer. Regards, Clara Whitmore. She sent the letter before she could second-guess herself. The Duke's reply arrived within hours. All terms accepted. When would you like to meet? The meeting was set for 2 days later at the Duke's solicitor's office. Clara arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in her simple gray wool, her mother's pearls, her only adornment. She was directed to a conference room where the Duke and 2 lawyers were already waiting. Ashford stood when she entered. Up close, in daylight, she could see changes in him too. Lines of stress around his eyes, a tightness to his mouth that suggested sleepless nights. He looked like a man carrying heavy burdens. Lady Clara, thank you for coming. Your Grace? She took a seat across from him, her posture straight, her expression neutral. Shall we proceed? The legal work took 2 hours. The Duke's solicitor presented the deed transfer documents, which Clara reviewed carefully with the help of Mr. Davison. The estate was larger than she'd imagined. 300 acres, including farmland that could provide income, forests that could supply lumber, and the main house with its 20 bedrooms, library, conservatory, and numerous outbuildings. It was worth a fortune, and he was simply giving it away. Why? Clara asked abruptly, interrupting a discussion of property boundaries. The Duke looked at her. I'm sorry? Why are you doing this? And don't tell me it's to make amends. This is too much for mere guilt. There's something else. The lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ashford was silent for a long moment, then dismissed both solicitors with a wave of his hand. Give us the room, please. When they were alone, he leaned back in his chair and met Clara's eyes directly. You're right. There is something else. He paused. Do you remember Lord Hartley, the man who suggested that disastrous dance 5 years ago? Vividly. He died 6 months ago, liver failure from drinking. He was 42 years old, and he died alone in a townhouse surrounded by expensive things he didn't care about and couldn't remember buying. The Duke's jaw tightened. I went to his funeral. Hardly anyone came. And I stood there looking at his coffin and realized that was going to be me in 20 years if I didn't change something fundamental about my life. So this is about fear, Clara said. Fear of dying alone. Partly, but it's more than that. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. I have everything society says a man should want. Title, wealth, influence. Women throw themselves at me hoping to become a duchess. Men court my favor for business connections. I could walk into any room in England and command respect. And I'm miserable. He turned to face her. I wake up every day and go through the motions of a life that means nothing. I attend parties where no one says anything real. I conduct business that makes me richer but serves no purpose beyond that. I'm surrounded by people and utterly alone because none of them know me, and I don't let them. Because the real me, the person underneath the title and the money, is someone I'm not particularly proud of. Clara studied him, her expression unreadable. You think giving away an estate will fix that? No. But I think doing something that actually matters might be a start. And your school matters, Lady Clara. In a world of empty gestures and meaningless accomplishments, you built something real. You changed lives. You made a difference. His voice dropped. I want to know what that feels like. Just once. I want to do something that isn't about maintaining my position or increasing my wealth or meeting society's expectations. I want to matter. There was raw honesty in his words, a vulnerability that Clara suspected he rarely showed anyone. She could see the truth of it in his eyes, in the tension of his shoulders, in the way his hands gripped the back of the chair. You could build your own school, she pointed out. Start your own charitable foundation. Why attach yourself to mine? Because I don't know how. Because I've never done anything without an army of servants and advisors and sycophants doing the actual work. Because I suspect if I tried on my own, I'd create something hollow and performative. Exactly the kind of thing you accused us all of being yesterday. He met her gaze steadily. I need someone who will tell me when I'm being an idiot. Someone who isn't afraid of my title or my money. Someone who has already proven they can build something meaningful with nothing. You need me to teach you, Clara said slowly. Yes, if you're willing. Clara stood and walked to the window herself, looking out at the London street below. A street vendor was selling flowers to a young couple. Two children chased each other around a lamppost. Life, ordinary and real, continuing regardless of the dramas playing out in solicitors' offices above. I'll accept the estate, she said finally, and I'll allow you to visit and observe the school's operations. But understand this, Your Grace. I am not your redemption project. I am not here to save your soul or teach you to be a better person. My only concern is the welfare of my students and the success of the school. I understand. If you come to Northumberland and you're disruptive, entitled, or useless, I will ask you to leave. Your title means nothing there. Your wealth means nothing there. You will be judged entirely on what you contribute and how you treat people. Fair enough. Clara turned to face him. And one more thing. If this is some elaborate scheme to win my forgiveness or overcome my objections through persistence, you should know it won't work. I don't forgive you. I probably never will. But I'm willing to use your resources to help my students, and I'm willing to let you participate if you can prove yourself useful. Nothing more. Something flickered in his expression, disappointment, perhaps, or pain, but he nodded. I accept those terms. They shook hands then, a formal sealing of an unusual bargain. Clara felt the calluses on her palm meet the smooth skin of his, evidence of their vastly different lives. When she pulled away, she saw him glance down at his own hand, as if noticing the contrast. When do we leave for Northumberland? He asked. We don't. I leave tomorrow. You may visit in 2 weeks after I've had time to assess the property and begin planning, and your visit will last no more than 3 days initially. You don't trust me. Not even slightly, Clara said bluntly. You'll have to earn that. The Duke smiled slightly, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, more human. I suppose that's fair? I'll arrive in 2 weeks then. With your permission, Clara nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Lady Clara, I am sorry, genuinely. Even if you never forgive me, I want you to know that I regret what I did more than anything else in my life. She looked back at him, this powerful man who suddenly seemed very small. I believe you, she said quietly, but sorrow changes nothing unless it drives action. Show me what you're willing to build from your regret. Then maybe it will mean something. Clara left London the next morning, taking the train north with her inheritance secured and the deed to the Durham estate in her possession. She watched the city recede through the window, knowing she'd changed something fundamental during her brief return. The girl who had fled in shame 5 years ago had come back as a woman who commanded respect on her own terms. But the real test was still ahead, because accepting the Duke's help meant allowing him into her world, into the sanctuary she'd built from nothing. It meant trusting, even marginally, that he meant what he said. And Clara had learned the hard way that trust was the most dangerous thing she could offer. The estate near Durham was everything the deed had promised and more. The house was magnificent, Georgian architecture with soaring ceilings and enormous windows that flooded the rooms with light. The grounds included gardens run wild, stables that could be converted to workshops, a greenhouse perfect for science classes, and cottages that could house teachers and older students. Clara walked through it all with Lady Pemberton at her side, her mind already reorganizing spaces, planning curricula, calculating costs. This is extraordinary, Lady Pemberton breathed. You could serve hundreds of students here. That's the plan, Clara said. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. This much, this fast. It felt precarious. What if the Duke changed his mind? What if there were hidden conditions she'd missed? What if this was all too good to be true? Stop it, Lady Pemberton said firmly. Stop what? Waiting for disaster. You've earned this, Clara. Through 5 years of backbreaking work and absolute dedication, you've earned the right to expand your mission. Don't let fear of what might go wrong prevent you from seizing what's finally going right. Clara wanted to believe her, but she'd learned to be suspicious of good fortune, especially when it came from people who had hurt her. 2 weeks later, true to his word, the Duke of Ashford arrived in Durham. Clara watched from an upper window as his carriage pulled up the drive. Not the ornate ducal carriage she'd expected, but a simpler coach with minimal adornment. He stepped out alone, no servants, no retinue, just a man in travel-worn clothes carrying a single bag. Clara waited until he knocked before descending to answer the door herself. "Your Grace, welcome to Durham." If he was surprised by her answering the door personally, he didn't show it. "Lady Clara, thank you for having me." She led him inside, watching how he took in the still unfurnished rooms, the dust sheets covering furniture, the general air of a place waiting to be transformed. "As you can see, there's much work to be done," Clara said. "I've hired local workers to begin repairs on the outbuildings, and I'm in negotiations with 3 potential teachers. But the main house needs extensive preparation before we can move students here." "What can I do to help?" he asked simply. Clara had prepared a test, a deliberately unpleasant, menial task designed to see if he would balk, if his offer of help had limits. The East Wing bedrooms need to be cleared and cleaned, furniture moved, floors scrubbed, windows washed. I've arranged for cleaning supplies in the hall. She waited for the protest, the suggestion that surely such work was beneath him, that he'd meant financial support or strategic advice. Instead, he set down his bag and removed his coat. "Show me where to start." For the next 3 days, Clara watched the Duke of Ashford scrub floors. She watched him carry furniture, wash windows, haul debris. He worked alongside the hired locals without complaint, his expensive clothes ruined by dust and cleaning solution, his hands developing blisters. On the second day, one of the workers, a gruff man named Thomas, tested him. "Oi, you're that Duke, aren't you? From London?" "I am," Ashford replied, continuing to scrub. "What's a Duke doing cleaning floors like common folk?" "Learning what common folk have known all along, that honest work has its own dignity." Thomas grunted, apparently satisfied, and the 2 men worked side by side for the rest of the afternoon. On the 3rd evening, Clara found the Duke sitting on the front steps, his hands wrapped in bandages, watching the sunset. She sat down beside him without invitation. "You could have stopped," she said. "I know. You could have hired people to do this work." "I know that too." "So why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment, flexing his bandaged hands. "Because you were testing me. And because I needed to prove to myself that I could do something real, even if it's just cleaning floors." Clara smiled slightly. "You passed." "Did I?" He looked at her. "You still don't trust me." "No," she admitted. "But I respect your effort. That's a start." They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade over the Durham hills. Finally, Ashford spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said at the memorial, about how we watched your humiliation and did nothing, about how our judgment was meaningless. And you were right. But it's more than just hypocrisy, isn't it? It's fear. We judge and exclude and mock because we're terrified of being judged ourselves. The whole system is built on performing for each other, on maintaining these elaborate fictions about worth and class and belonging. And anyone who doesn't fit the mold threatens the whole structure." "So you destroyed me to protect yourself," Clara said flatly. "Yes. And I've spent 5 years understanding that what I destroyed in that moment wasn't just your dignity, it was my own. Because every time I chose cruelty over kindness, every time I valued appearance over substance, I became less of who I wanted to be and more of what society demanded." Clara absorbed this, understanding the truth of it even as she resisted sympathizing. "That doesn't absolve you." "I know, nothing does." He stood, wincing slightly at stiff muscles. "But perhaps someday, the good I do might balance against the harm I've caused. Not erase it, just balance it." "Perhaps," Clara allowed. As the Duke prepared to leave the next morning, he handed Clara an envelope. "What's this?" "The names and addresses of 23 families in London who have expressed interest in donating to the school. Most are women who were at the memorial, who heard your speech." He paused. "You started something, Lady Clara. People are listening." After he left, Clara opened the envelope and found not just names, but detailed notes about each potential donor, their interests, their resources, their potential contributions. The Duke had clearly spent significant time compiling this information. It was useful, valuable, and it suggested he understood what she was building in a way she hadn't expected. Maybe, Clara thought, allowing herself the smallest sliver of hope, this partnership might actually work. But that hope shattered 3 weeks later when a letter arrived from London, and Clara learned that Victoria had made a move she'd never anticipated, one that threatened to destroy everything she'd built before it even truly began. The letter was written on Victoria's personal stationery, the cream paper thick and expensive, the script elegant. Clara recognized it immediately when the post arrived that gray November morning. She held it for a moment before opening, a sense of dread settling in her stomach like ice water. Clara, I thought you should know that I've petitioned the Court of Chancery to investigate your so-called school. It has come to my attention that you are operating an unlicensed educational institution, accepting funds without proper oversight, and potentially endangering the morals of young women by exposing them to inappropriate materials. Furthermore, I have shared with several influential members of Parliament my concerns about your mental stability, supported by testimony from multiple witnesses who observed your unhinged behavior at your father's memorial. A woman who would speak so disrespectfully of the dead, who would make such wild accusations against respected members of society, clearly cannot be trusted with the care and education of children. I expect the investigation to begin within the month. I suggest you prepare accordingly. Victoria Whitmore. Clara read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling with fury. Then she walked calmly to the fireplace and fed it to the flames, watching Victoria's elegant script curl and blacken. Bad news? Lady Pemberton had arrived that morning to help interview potential teachers, and she'd seen Clara's face when the post came. Victoria is trying to shut down the school. She's filed some kind of petition claiming I'm operating illegally and that I'm mentally unfit. Lady Pemberton's expression darkened. That vindictive snake. Can she actually do that? I don't know. Clara pressed her hands to her temples, thinking rapidly. The school in Whitby isn't licensed because there's no requirement for licensing in that region. But here in Durham, closer to major cities, there might be different regulations. And if she's convinced politicians that I'm unstable, we need a solicitor, immediately. We need more than that. Clara moved to the desk and began writing rapidly. We need evidence that what we're doing is legitimate and beneficial. We need testimonials from families whose children have benefited from the education. We need documentation of our curriculum, our methods, our outcomes, and we need it all before whatever investigator arrives. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara worked with a desperation she hadn't felt since those first brutal months in Northumberland. She compiled records of every student she'd taught, tracked down parents to request written statements, documented the school's finances down to the last penny. Lady Pemberton wrote to every influential contact she had, calling in favors and building a network of support. But it wasn't enough. Clara could feel it in her bones. Victoria had connections, money, and the full weight of London society's prejudice against educated lower classes. The investigation would be biased from the start. The Duke arrived unexpectedly on a Wednesday afternoon, his horse lathered from hard riding. Clara was in the library, surrounded by papers, her eyes red from lack of sleep. I heard, he said without preamble, about Victoria's petition. News travels fast. I have friends in Parliament. They told me what she's claiming. He crossed to the desk, his expression grim. She's painting you as a dangerous radical who's corrupting young minds with seditious ideas. She's claiming you're teaching children to question authority, to reject their natural place in society. I am teaching them to think, Clara said sharply. If that's seditious, then yes, I'm guilty. I'm not criticizing, I'm warning you. The men she's influenced, they're genuinely frightened of what you represent. A woman who rejected society's rules and succeeded anyway. Lower-class children learning to read and reason. The whole thing threatens their worldview. Clara laughed bitterly. So they'll destroy it. Not if we stop them first. The Duke pulled up a chair, his expression intense. I can help. I have influence with these men. I can speak to them, convince them that your school is harmless. Harmless? Clara's voice was ice. My school is not harmless. It's transformative. It's dangerous to people who profit from ignorance, and I will not pretend otherwise to make small-minded men comfortable. Then you'll lose everything. His frustration broke through his careful composure. Clara, I'm trying to help you, but you have to be willing to compromise, to play the political game. No. She stood facing him across the desk. I spent 23 years compromising, making myself smaller, trying to fit into boxes designed to contain me. I will not do it again. If they shut down my school, if they destroy everything I've built, at least I'll go down fighting for something real. You're being stubborn. I'm being principled. There's a difference. They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, the Duke exhaled slowly. All right. Then we fight. But we fight smart. He leaned forward. You're right that we can't compromise on what you're teaching or why it matters. But we can control the narrative. We can make them see what you've actually accomplished, not what they fear you've accomplished. How? Bring them here. When the investigator comes, don't just show him papers and testimonials. Show him the students. Let him see real children whose lives have been changed. Let him talk to parents, to teachers, to community members. Make it impossible for him to dismiss this as some radical experiment. Clara considered this. Victoria will have prepared him. He'll come expecting to find evidence of subversion. Then we give him evidence of the opposite. We show him discipline, structure, genuine learning. We show him that education doesn't destroy the social order. It strengthens it by giving people the tools to contribute meaningfully. You want me to lie about what we're doing here? No. I want you to be strategic about how you present the truth. His eyes met hers steadily. You're teaching children to think critically, yes, but you're also teaching them mathematics, literature, science, practical skills. You're giving them knowledge that makes them better workers, better parents, better citizens. Lead with that. Let them discover the rest slowly. It felt like surrender, but Clara was pragmatic enough to recognize wisdom when she heard it. Fine. When is this investigator arriving? Within the week, according to my sources. They had 6 days. Clara mobilized everyone. The older students from Whitby were brought to Durham to demonstrate their learning. Parents were coached on what to say, not lies, but carefully chosen truths that emphasize stability and improvement. The curriculum was organized into neat binders that showed progression, structure, pedagogical soundness. The Duke worked alongside them, and Clara found herself grudgingly impressed by his political acumen. He knew exactly how to frame things, which details to emphasize, how to make radical ideas sound reasonable. This section on literature, he said, reviewing her curriculum notes, you have them reading Wollstonecraft. Yes, a vindication of the rights of woman. It's essential. It's inflammatory, at least to the men who will be reviewing this. He held up a hand before she could protest. I'm not saying remove it. I'm saying bury it in the third-year curriculum and lead with Shakespeare, Milton, Wordsworth. Give them what they expect to see first. That's manipulative. That's survival. You can't teach anyone anything if they shut you down in the first month. Clara hated that he was right. The investigator arrived on a cold Monday morning. Sir Edmund Cartwright was exactly what Clara expected. A gray-haired bureaucrat with pinched features and an expression of permanent disapproval. He arrived with an assistant who took notes on everything, and his first words were not promising. Lady Clara Whitmore, I'm here on behalf of the Court of Chancery to assess the legitimacy and appropriateness of your educational establishment. Of course. Please come in. She gave him the tour she'd carefully planned. The orderly classrooms where students sat in neat rows working on mathematics problems. The library with its respectable collection of approved texts prominently displayed. The science laboratory where older students conducted supervised experiments in chemistry and biology. Sir Edmund examined everything with a critical eye, his assistant scribbling constantly. When they reached a classroom where 12-year-old Margaret Davies was reading aloud from Milton, he interrupted. You girl, what's your background? Margaret looked up, startled. Sir. Your family, what does your father do? He's a fisherman, sir, in Whitby. And before you came here, could you read? No, sir, not a word. Sir Edmund's expression suggested this was somehow suspicious. And now you're reading Milton. Don't you find it difficult, beyond your station? Clara saw Margaret's face flush, saw the shame starting to creep in, and intervened smoothly. Margaret is one of our most promising students. She's demonstrated exceptional aptitude for literature and is already helping teach younger children their letters. After she completes our program, she plans to seek employment as a governess. A governess, Sir Edmund repeated flatly. A fisherman's daughter. Why not? The Duke's voice came from the doorway. Clara turned to see him standing there, perfectly composed in expensive riding clothes. Sir Edmund, I didn't know you were here today. The investigator's demeanor shifted immediately. Your Grace, I wasn't aware you were involved with this institution. Lady Clara is doing remarkable work here. I've been fortunate enough to observe it firsthand. The Duke moved into the room, his presence commanding immediate deference. Margaret, would you mind reading that passage for Sir Edmund? I think he'd appreciate hearing the quality of your elocution. Margaret read, her voice clear and confident, and even Sir Edmund couldn't deny the skill evident in her delivery. But his expression remained skeptical. Over the next 3 days, Sir Edmund investigated every aspect of the school. He interviewed students, teachers, parents. He reviewed financial records, curriculum documents, safety protocols. He attended lessons, observed teaching methods, examined the dormitories where some students boarded, and through it all, Clara could see him searching for the scandal Victoria had promised him. The sedition, the moral corruption, the dangerous radical undermining society's foundations. He found order instead, structure, discipline, children learning skills that would make them productive members of society. It clearly frustrated him. On the 4th day, he requested a private meeting with Clara in the library. The Duke insisted on being present, and Clara was grateful for it when she saw Sir Edmund's opening move. Lady Whitmore, I've reviewed your curriculum quite thoroughly, and I must say, some of the texts you've included are questionable. In what way? This Wollstonecraft, for instance, known radical, advocated for the complete upheaval of natural social hierarchies. Hardly appropriate reading for impressionable young minds. It's assigned to advanced students who have already demonstrated critical thinking skills, Clara replied calmly, and it's taught in the context of philosophical debate, alongside opposing viewpoints. We're teaching students to think, not what to think. A dangerous distinction. Is it? The Duke leaned forward. Sir Edmund, surely you don't believe educated citizens are a threat to social stability. History suggests quite the opposite. Ignorance breeds revolution. Knowledge breeds thoughtful civic participation. That's a convenient view for someone of your position, Your Grace. But these aren't your children. These are the children of fishermen, farmers, laborers. Do they truly need philosophy? Won't it simply make them dissatisfied with their natural lot? Clara felt her temper flare, but the Duke caught her eye. A warning. She swallowed her first response and tried a different approach. Sir Edmund, may I ask what you fear will happen if these children learn to read and reason? I fear exactly what has happened in France, in the American colonies. I fear that people who should be content with honest labor will begin to resent the natural order of things. The natural order, Clara repeated softly. You mean the order that says a fisherman's daughter can never be anything more than a fisherman's wife? That a brilliant mind should go to waste because it was born into the wrong family? Some would call that wisdom, not waste. And I would call it criminal negligence of human potential. Clara stood, her patience exhausted. Sir Edmund, you came here expecting to find a dangerous radical operation. Instead, you found children learning mathematics and literature, parents grateful for opportunities their children would never have otherwise had, and a community strengthened by knowledge. If that threatens you, then perhaps the problem isn't with my school. The room fell silent. The Duke closed his eyes briefly, as if pained. Sir Edmund's face turned red, then purple. I see your stepmother was quite right about your mental state, he said coldly. This interview is over. He left that afternoon, his assistant struggling to keep up with his furious pace. Clara stood at the window and watched their carriage disappear down the drive, feeling the weight of defeat settle over her. You shouldn't have said that, the Duke said quietly. I know. He'll recommend closure. Victoria wins. I know that too. Clara turned to face him. But I will not grovel before men who believe education is a privilege reserved for those born into the right families. I will not pretend that what we're doing here is somehow less important because our students are poor. Noble sentiments. They won't save your school. Then it can't be saved. The Duke studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You really mean that? You'd rather lose everything than compromise your principles? Yes. Even though compromise would let you continue teaching, continue changing lives? Compromise today leads to more compromise tomorrow. Eventually, you compromise so much that you've lost the very thing you were trying to protect. Clara moved back to her desk, suddenly exhausted. I've spent my whole life watching people compromise their integrity for comfort. I won't become them. The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. I think you're right. Clara looked up sharply. What? I think you're right, he repeated. I've been advising you to play politics, to manage perceptions, to say what people want to hear. But that's exactly the thinking that created the world you're trying to change. You can't fight a corrupt system by adopting its methods. Then what do? We expose it. His eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. Sir Edmund expects his recommendation to be rubber-stamped by the court. But what if we go public first? What if we show London, show all of England, what's actually happening here before the court can bury it in bureaucratic language? How? The newspapers. We invite every major paper to send reporters here. We let them see what Sir Edmund saw. We let them interview students, parents, teachers. We force the court to make their decision in full public view. Clara's heart began to race. That's risky. If public opinion turns against us, then we were finished anyway. But if we can show people the truth, if we can make them care. The Duke stood, pacing now. Most people never think about education for the poor. They accept that it's not their concern. But what if we make it impossible to ignore? What if we show them 12-year-old Margaret reading Milton, show them her father weeping with pride, show them the future we're building? It was audacious. It was dangerous. It was possibly insane. Clara loved it. Do it, she said. Invite the papers. Let them see everything. Over the next week, reporters descended on Durham like a swarm. The Times, the Telegraph, the Manchester Guardian, even international papers sent correspondents. The Duke had called in every favor he had, and the result was a media spectacle unlike anything Clara had imagined. She gave them complete access. They sat in on lessons, interviewed anyone they wanted, reviewed whatever documents they requested. Some came expecting to write hit pieces about a deluded woman playing at education. Others came genuinely curious. All of them left changed. The articles began appearing within days. Some were skeptical, some were supportive, but all of them told the story of real children, real families, real transformation. The Manchester Guardian ran a front-page piece about 10-year-old Thomas Wright, who had gone from illiterate street urchin to teaching himself Latin from a borrowed dictionary. The Times published an editorial questioning whether England could afford to waste the potential represented by Clara's students, particularly given increasing economic competition from America and Germany. Public opinion began to shift. Letters poured in, some supportive, some vicious, all of them indicating that people were paying attention. Donations increased. So did threats. 3 weeks after the reporters left, someone set fire to one of the outbuildings. Clara was in the main house when she smelled smoke. She ran outside to find the old stable engulfed in flames, the fire spreading rapidly toward the main building in the strong wind. "Get the students out!" she screamed to the teachers. "Everyone outside! Move to the north lawn!" The Duke appeared at her side, his face grim. This was deliberate. I saw someone running from the building just before it caught. We'll worry about who later. Right now, we need to stop this from spreading. They formed a bucket brigade. Teachers, older students, even the Duke himself hauling water from the well. But the fire had too much of a head start. The stable was lost, and the flames were reaching for the main house. "We need to evacuate," Lady Pemberton shouted over the roar. "Get the children farther away." "No." Clara stared at the approaching flames, her mind racing. "If we lose the main house, we lose everything. All our records, our books, the students' work, all of it. Better than losing lives. The wind is shifting. The Duke pointed to the trees. "If we can hold it for another 10 minutes, the wind will push the fire back on itself." It was insane. It was desperate. But Clara saw the truth of it. The wind was indeed shifting, the flames beginning to flicker in the opposite direction. "Everyone inside," she commanded. "Wet blankets on the windows, bucket brigades on every floor. We saved this house." For 20 minutes, they fought. Clara's lungs burned from smoke, her hands were raw from rope and water, her vision blurred from ash. The Duke was everywhere, coordinating efforts, hauling water, beating back embers with wet blankets. And slowly, impossibly, they won. The wind shifted fully, pushing the fire back toward the already burned stable. The flames attacking the main house sputtered and died. By the time the local fire brigade arrived, the crisis was over. The stable was gone. 3 students had minor burns. Everyone was covered in soot and ash, coughing, exhausted. But they'd saved the school. Clara stood in the ruined stable yard as dawn broke, staring at the destruction. The Duke found her there, his expensive clothes destroyed, his face streaked with ash. "Someone wanted us gone," she said quietly. "Victoria?" "Maybe, or Sir Edmund, or just someone who believes what we're doing here is wrong." Clara turned to him. "They'll try again." "I know. And next time we might not be so lucky." "I know that too." He met her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Clara looked back at the main house, where students were being checked over by the doctor, where teachers were already planning how to continue lessons despite the chaos. She thought of Margaret reading Milton, of Thomas teaching himself Latin, of 30 children who had futures now when they'd had none before. "I'm going to fight," she said. "Whatever it takes, whoever tries to stop us, I'm going to fight." The Duke smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "Good, because so am I." But the next morning brought news that changed everything. A rider arrived from London at full gallop, his horse lathered and trembling. He carried a letter sealed with the Court of Chancery's mark. Clara opened it with shaking hands, the Duke reading over her shoulder. "By order of the Court of Chancery, the educational establishment operated by Clara Whitmore at Durham is hereby suspended pending full investigation into allegations of criminal negligence, reckless endangerment of minors, and operating an unlicensed institution. All students are to be removed from the premises immediately. Lady Whitmore is forbidden from teaching or operating any educational facility until the investigation concludes. Furthermore, Lady Whitmore is summoned to appear before the court in London within 7 days to answer these charges. Failure to appear will result in arrest and prosecution." Clara read it twice, her vision blurring. Everything. They were taking everything. "The fire," the Duke said, his voice hollow. "They're using the fire as evidence of negligence." "But it was arson. Can you prove that? Because they'll say you failed to provide adequate safety measures, that you endangered children with your reckless operation." His face was pale. "Clara, this is worse than closure. They're building a criminal case." "Let them." Clara's voice was steel. "I'll go to London. I'll face their court, and I'll tell them exactly what I think of their charges. You could go to prison." "Then I'll go to prison." She looked at him, her jaw set. "But I will not let them silence me. I will not disappear quietly. If they want to destroy what we've built here, they'll have to do it publicly, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what they're destroying and why." The Duke stared at her, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. Or something deeper that she didn't have time to analyze. "Then we go to London together," he said, "and we make them regret ever coming after you." As they prepared to leave for London, as teachers organized the heartbreaking work of sending students home, as parents wept and children asked questions no one could answer, Clara stood one last time in the library that had been her sanctuary. The room smelled of smoke and ash and loss. But when she looked at the shelves of books, at the desk where she'd planned lessons, at the window overlooking the grounds where children had played and learned and grown, she felt no regret. She had built something real. And now she would fight for it with everything she had, consequences be damned. The battle was coming to London, and this time, Clara Whitmore was ready for war. The train to London felt like a journey toward execution. Clara sat in the first-class compartment the Duke had insisted on, watching the Durham countryside give way to industrial towns, then to the sprawling outskirts of the capital. Across from her, Ashford reviewed documents with his solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, a sharp-eyed man who'd been analyzing the court's case for weaknesses. "The charges are thin," Pemberton said, tapping the papers. "Criminal negligence requires proof of willful disregard for safety. The fire was arson. We have witnesses who saw someone fleeing. That undermines their entire premise." "Will the court care about witnesses from Durham?" Clara asked. "Or will they dismiss them as biased locals protecting me?" Pemberton's silence was answer enough. The Duke looked up from his notes. "Then we make it impossible for them to dismiss the evidence. We bring the witnesses to London. We bring the students, the parents, the teachers. We flood the courtroom with people whose lives contradict the court's narrative." "That will cost a fortune," Clara said. "Train fare, lodging, lost wages for parents who can't work. I have a fortune." The Duke's tone left no room for argument. "And I can't think of a better use for it." Clara wanted to protest, wanted to maintain her independence, but pragmatism won. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still have to win." They arrived in London on a gray December afternoon, the city wrapped in fog and coal smoke. The Duke had arranged for Clara to stay at his townhouse, scandalous by society's standards, but he'd dismissed those concerns with a wave. "Your reputation is already destroyed according to them," he'd said. "Might as well be comfortable while we fight." The townhouse was magnificent, all marble and gilt and expensive art. Clara found it suffocating after months in Durham's open spaces, but she forced herself to focus on the battle ahead. That evening, they assembled their war council in the Duke's study. Pemberton spread documents across the massive desk while Lady Pemberton, who'd insisted on coming to London, poured tea with shaking hands. "The hearing is in 3 days," Pemberton began. "The court will present their case first. Evidence of negligence, testimony from Sir Edmund, likely some fabricated complaints from concerned citizens. Then we respond." "What's our strategy?" Clara asked. "Truth, primarily. We show that the fire was arson, that your safety measures were adequate, that the students were thriving under your care, but—" Pemberton hesitated. "We also need to address the underlying accusation." "Which is?" "That you're dangerous, that educating the lower classes destabilizes society. Sir Edmund's report makes that quite explicit. He believes your school threatens the natural order." Pemberton looked at Clara seriously. "We need to convince the court that educated workers strengthen Britain, not weaken it." "How do we do that?" The Duke leaned forward. "We show them what educated workers look like. Margaret reading Milton, Thomas teaching himself Latin, children who can calculate compound interest and understand basic chemistry. We make it clear that knowledge doesn't breed revolution, it breeds competence." "And if they don't care about competence?" Clara's voice was sharp. "If what they really fear is loss of control?" "Then we make them care about public opinion," the Duke replied. "The newspapers have been following this story. People are watching. If the court rules against us too obviously, too unjustly, there will be backlash." It was a gamble. Everything was a gamble now. Over the next 2 days, Clara barely slept. She prepared testimony, reviewed documents, rehearsed answers to hostile questions. The Duke brought witnesses from Durham, 15 people willing to testify, including Margaret and her father, Thomas Wright, and his mother, 3 teachers, and the local vicar who'd supported the school from the beginning. Victoria, naturally, heard about Clara's return. She appeared at the townhouse on the evening before the hearing, her carriage stopping outside with deliberate ostentation. The butler tried to turn her away, but Clara overruled him. "Let her in. This conversation is overdue." Victoria swept into the drawing room in black silk and diamonds, her expression triumphant. The Duke stood when she entered, his face cold. "Victoria, how unexpected." "Is it?" She removed her gloves slowly, her gaze moving between Clara and the Duke with calculating interest. "The two of you hiding away in his townhouse, how very cozy. I assume society knows." "I assume you've told them," Clara said flatly. "Naturally, along with everything else. The fire you caused through incompetence, the children you endangered, the radical nonsense you've been teaching." Victoria smiled. "Tomorrow, the court will shut you down permanently. And this time, there's no northern wasteland to exile you to. This time, you'll face real consequences." "Why?" The question came from the Duke, and his voice was hard. Why do you hate her this much? Victoria's smile faltered slightly. I don't hate her. I simply recognize a threat when I see one. A threat to what? To order. To propriety. To the natural hierarchy that keeps society functioning. Victoria's composure cracked slightly, showing the venom beneath. She was supposed to disappear quietly, accept her place, marry some minor gentleman, fade into obscurity. Instead, she built something. She made people notice her. She made people question whether perhaps the world's judgment of her was wrong. And that terrified you, Clara said softly, understanding dawning. Because if I could prove the world wrong about me, other women might start questioning the world's judgment of them, including you. Victoria's face flushed. Don't be absurd. You spent your whole life being exactly what men wanted you to be. Beautiful, obedient, decorative. You married my father for security, played the perfect widow for sympathy, and now you're trying to destroy me because my existence suggests there might be another way to live. Clara stood, facing her stepmother directly. You don't hate me, Victoria. You envy me, because I'm free, and you never will be. The slap came fast, Victoria's palm cracking across Clara's cheek with enough force to snap her head sideways. The Duke moved immediately, stepping between them, but Clara waved him back. Get out, she said quietly, her cheek burning. And tomorrow, when the court hears the truth about what I've built and why it matters, remember that you had a choice. You could have supported something meaningful. Instead, you chose to destroy it because it frightened you. Victoria left without another word, her composure shattered, her hands shaking with rage. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. Clara dressed in her simplest gown, dark blue wool, her mother's pearls, no other adornment. She looked like what she was, a woman who had built something with her own hands and refused to apologize for it. The Court of Chancery occupied an imposing building in Westminster, all stone columns and stern faces carved into the facade. Clara entered with the Duke at her side, Pemberton just behind, and found the courtroom already packed. Reporters filled the gallery, sketching frantically. Victoria sat in the front row, flanked by stern-looking men in expensive suits, and in the back, barely noticed by the London crowd, sat 15 people from Durham. Margaret in her best dress, Thomas Wright clutching a Latin grammar book, parents with work-roughened hands and determined expressions. The judge entered, Lord Chancellor Pemberton, no relation to the Duke's solicitor. He was elderly, white-haired, with the pinched expression of someone who'd never been contradicted in his life. This hearing will address charges of criminal negligence and unlicensed operation of an educational facility against Lady Clara Whitmore, he announced. The court will hear evidence and render judgment. Proceed. Sir Edmund took the stand first, his testimony damning and precise. The fire proved inadequate safety measures. The curriculum proved dangerous radical influence. The students, children of laborers and fishermen, proved the school's fundamental unsuitability. These children should be learning trades, Sir Edmund concluded. Fishing, farming, domestic service, and trades. Instead, Lady Whitmore fills their heads with Latin and philosophy, making them dissatisfied with honest labor. The fire was merely the physical manifestation of the chaos her methods inevitably create. Pemberton cross-examined him carefully. Sir Edmund, you spent 3 days observing the school. Did you see any evidence of actual chaos? The very concept is chaotic. Did you see children misbehaving, teachers unable to control their classes, any disorder whatsoever? Sir Edmund's jaw tightened. The appearance of order doesn't negate the fundamental instability of the enterprise. So you saw order, but you've decided to call it chaos anyway. I saw the seeds of future chaos. Based on what evidence? Based on history. Based on the French Revolution, the American Rebellion, every uprising that began with educating people beyond their station. The courtroom stirred. Pemberton let the words hang in the air, then asked quietly, So your objection isn't to Lady Whitmore's methods, but to the very idea of educating the poor? I didn't say, You just compared her school to the French Revolution, Sir Edmund. What else could you possibly mean? The judge intervened. Mr. Pemberton, move on. Victoria testified next, painting Clara as unstable, vengeful, obsessed with proving herself at any cost. She described the memorial speech as evidence of mental breakdown, the school as a desperate attempt to matter. "My stepdaughter has always been troubled," Victoria said with practiced sorrow. "Her father and I tried to help her, but she rejected all guidance. When we suggested retirement to the country for her health, she twisted it into some kind of punishment. She's been acting out ever since." Pemberton's cross-examination was surgical. "Mrs. Whitmore, you petitioned to have Lady Clara declared mentally incompetent and her inheritance challenged, did you not?" "I was concerned for her welfare. A concern that would conveniently have given you control of her £10,000? That's not. And when that failed, you filed this complaint with the court. Another attempt to control your stepdaughter's life and resources?" Victoria's composure cracked. "She's destroying herself. Someone has to stop her. Or perhaps someone simply doesn't want her to succeed." The judge called a recess. Clara retreated to a side room where her witnesses waited, their faces anxious. "They're going to rule against us," Margaret's father said quietly. "That judge, he's already decided." "Maybe," Clara admitted, "but we're not done yet." When court reconvened, Pemberton called his first witness. Margaret Davies took the stand, small and nervous in her Sunday dress. The courtroom watched with barely concealed contempt. A fisherman's daughter, presuming to testify before the Court of Chancery. Pemberton was gentle with her. "Margaret, tell us what your life was like before Lady Whitmore's school." "I couldn't read, sir. Couldn't write my own name. I helped my mother with washing and mending, but there wasn't much future in it. I was going to go into service at 12, and now? Now I can read Milton and Shakespeare. I can do mathematics through calculus. I know geography, history, basic Latin." Her voice grew stronger. "And when I finish my education, I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to help other girls like me." "Do you feel you've been radicalized? Made dissatisfied with your natural place?" Margaret thought about this seriously. "I've been made dissatisfied with wasted potential, sir. My natural place isn't determined by who my father is. It's determined by what I can learn and what I can do with that learning." A ripple went through the courtroom. The judge's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his fingers tighten on his gavel. Thomas Wright followed, then his mother, then the teachers. Each told the same story: lives transformed, potential realized, futures created where none had existed. The vicar testified about the school's positive impact on the entire Durham region, how crime had decreased and economic prospects had improved. Then the Duke took the stand. He testified about the fire, about seeing the arsonist flee, about Clara's heroic efforts to save the building and protect the students. He described the school's safety measures in detail, the careful supervision, the thoroughly planned curriculum. "Your Grace," the prosecutor said during cross-examination, "you have a considerable financial interest in Lady Whitmore's school, do you not?" "I donated a property, yes." "Why would someone of your position involve himself in such an enterprise?" The Duke met the prosecutor's eyes steadily. "Because I've spent my entire life pursuing meaningless accomplishments. Money, titles, social standing, all of it empty. Lady Whitmore showed me what real achievement looks like. She built something that actually matters, that changes lives, that makes the world measurably better. I wanted to be part of that. Some might say you're simply infatuated with her. Some might. They'd be wrong. I'm infatuated with the idea that my wealth and position could actually mean something, could serve some purpose beyond my own comfort." He leaned forward. "That school represents everything our society should value: hard work, earned achievement, the transformation of potential into reality. If this court shuts it down, you're not protecting society. You're protecting your own fear of change." The judge's gavel cracked down. "Your Grace, you will not lecture this court." "Why not?" The Duke stood, his voice carrying across the room. "Someone should. You're so terrified of losing control that you'd rather waste the talents of thousands of children than admit that maybe, just maybe, the accident of birth shouldn't determine a person's entire future." "You are in contempt. I'm in despair." The Duke's composure shattered, raw emotion breaking through. "I've watched this country waste human potential for my entire life, and I've done nothing about it because I was comfortable. Well, I'm not comfortable anymore. And if speaking the truth puts me in contempt of this court, then hold me in contempt. But don't expect me to stay silent while you destroy something good and call it justice." The courtroom erupted. The judge shouted for order, his gavel hammering uselessly. Reporters scribbled frantically. Victoria looked stricken, as if she'd never imagined this outcome. And Clara felt something shift, not in the judge's expression, which remained stony, but in the room itself. The energy had changed. People were listening, really listening, perhaps for the first time. Finally, the judge regained control. "We will recess until tomorrow morning, when I will render my judgment. Court dismissed." That night, the Duke's townhouse was silent. Clara stood in the library, staring at nothing, exhausted beyond measure. "That was foolish," she said when the Duke entered. "Speaking to the judge like that, you could face serious consequences." "I don't care." "You should. You risked everything. For something that matters." He crossed to where she stood, his expression intense. "Clara, I've spent 5 years regretting what I said to you at that ball. 5 years wishing I could take it back, make it right. Today, I finally did something worth doing. Whatever happens tomorrow, I don't regret it."
Ça est une suspension.
Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the cruel Duke who'd humiliated her, but a man who'd transformed himself as completely as she had. They'd both been forged by failure, shaped by regret, made new by choosing to fight for something beyond themselves. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "What?" "When you offered me that estate, I thought it was guilt, maybe manipulation. I didn't trust it, didn't trust you." She paused. "I was wrong. You meant it. You've proven it over and over. And I want you to know that even if we lose tomorrow, even if they shut down the school and lock me away, what you did mattered. You changed. You grew. You became someone worth knowing." The Duke's eyes were bright. "Clara, I'm not finished." She cut him off, needing to say this before courage failed. "I don't forgive you for what you did 5 years ago. I may never forgive you, but I respect who you've become since then. And if we survive this, if we somehow win, I think I'd like to know you better. The real you, not the Duke. Just James." He stared at her and she saw a dozen emotions cross his face. Hope, fear, longing, uncertainty. Finally, he said simply, "I'd like that too." They stood there in the quiet library, two people who'd found each other through pain and pride and the stubborn refusal to accept what the world said they should be. Tomorrow might bring disaster, but tonight they had this: understanding, respect, and the fragile beginning of something that might, eventually, become more. The next morning, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread about the Duke's outburst, and apparently half of London wanted to witness the judgment. Clara sat beside Pemberton, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. Whatever came, she was ready for it. The judge entered, his face giving nothing away. He settled into his seat, surveyed the courtroom, and began. "This court has considered all evidence presented regarding the educational establishment operated by Lady Clara Whitmore. We have heard testimony about the fire, about the curriculum, about the impact on students and community." He paused, and Clara's heart hammered. "The charges of criminal negligence are dismissed. Evidence clearly indicates the fire was arson, and Lady Whitmore's actions during the crisis were heroic, not negligent. However," Clara's stomach dropped. "However, the charge of operating an unlicensed facility stands. Lady Whitmore did not obtain proper authorization before establishing her school, and this court cannot overlook that violation regardless of the positive outcomes achieved." Victoria smiled triumphantly. But the judge wasn't finished. "Therefore, Lady Whitmore is hereby ordered to obtain appropriate licensing within 6 months. During that period, the school may continue operations under supervised conditions. A designated inspector will visit quarterly to ensure compliance with all regulations regarding safety, curriculum appropriateness, and student welfare." The courtroom exploded. Clara sat frozen, trying to process what she'd just heard. They hadn't shut her down. They'd given her time. "Furthermore," the judge continued over the noise, "this court recognizes the evident value of Lady Whitmore's educational efforts. The testimony of students and families was compelling. While we cannot endorse the establishment of unlicensed schools, We also cannot ignore the positive transformation evident in those who attended. He looked directly at Clara. Lady Whitmore, you have 6 months to comply with all licensing requirements. Use that time wisely. This court is not in the business of destroying what works. We are in the business of ensuring it works safely and legally. Court dismissed. The gavel fell. Clara sat motionless as chaos erupted around her. Reporters rushed for the doors. Victoria was shouting something at her lawyers. Margaret and Thomas were crying, hugging their parents. And the Duke was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. You won, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Clara, you won. Not yet, she replied, standing on shaking legs. But we have a chance, a real chance. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Clara emerged to a cacophony of questions from reporters, shouts from supporters, and detractors alike. She stood on the steps, the Duke at her side, and felt the weight of the moment. Someone in the crowd called out, Lady Clara, what will you do now? She looked at the faces, curious, hostile, sympathetic, skeptical. She thought about Margaret and Thomas, about 30 students whose futures hung in the balance, about every child in England who'd been told their birth determined their destiny. I'm going back to Durham, she said clearly. I'm going to get that license. I'm going to expand the school. And I'm going to prove that education isn't a privilege for the wealthy. It's a right for everyone. The crowd erupted in response, some cheering, some jeering. Clara didn't care. She'd faced them all down, the court, Victoria, society's contempt. And she was still standing, still fighting, still building. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time since that humiliating night 5 years ago, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. And standing beside her, his own future transformed by the choice to fight alongside her, the Duke of Ashford felt it too. The train north felt different this time. Clara watched London disappear through the window with none of the bitterness that had accompanied her previous departures. Beside her, the Duke was already drafting letters to education officials, mapping out the licensing requirements they'd need to meet. 6 months, he said without looking up. It's tight, but manageable. We need to document everything: curriculum standards, safety protocols, teacher qualifications, financial accounting. We need to rebuild the stable first, Clara reminded him, and repair the smoke damage to the east wing, and hire 2 more teachers before we can even think about expansion. Then we'd better get started. Lady Pemberton met them at the Durham station with news that made Clara's chest tighten. The students want to come back, all of them. Their parents have been writing, asking when the school reopens. Tell them 2 weeks, Clara said. We need that long to make the main building safe and organize proper supervision. Those 2 weeks became a blur of impossible work. Clara and the Duke worked 16-hour days alongside local laborers, clearing debris, scrubbing smoke-stained walls, replacing damaged floorboards. The Duke's expensive clothes were destroyed within 3 days, replaced by simple work shirts and trousers that transformed him from aristocrat to just another pair of hands. On the 5th day, something unexpected happened. A carriage arrived carrying 5 women from London, society wives who'd read about the school in the newspapers. They'd come, their spokesperson explained nervously, to volunteer. We've been following your story, Lady Catherine Hartwell said. She was perhaps 40, elegantly dressed, but with intelligent eyes that assessed Clara carefully. What you said at the memorial, what you built here, it made us think about our own lives, about whether we're just performing roles or actually contributing something meaningful. Clara studied them. These wealthy women who'd never done a day's manual labor in their lives. Can any of you teach? I speak French and Italian, one offered. I could teach languages. I studied music at the conservatory, another said, before I married. I'm good with numbers, a third added. My husband doesn't know, but I've been managing our household accounts for years. Clara made a decision that would have shocked her 5 years ago. All right, you can stay, but understand, this isn't charity work you can abandon when it gets difficult. These students depend on consistency. If you commit fully. They stayed. And over the following week, more volunteers arrived. A Cambridge mathematician who'd read about Thomas Wright's Latin dictionary. A doctor's widow who wanted to teach basic medicine and hygiene. A former governess tired of teaching spoiled children and hungry for students who actually wanted to learn. The school was growing beyond anything Clara had imagined. On the day the students returned, Clara stood in the courtyard and watched them arrive. Margaret ran to her first, throwing her arms around Clara's waist with unrestrained joy. Thomas followed, lugging a bag of books he'd somehow acquired in Durham. Others came in wagons and on foot, their faces bright with hope and determination. "Did you think we'd abandon you?" Margaret's father asked gruffly. "After what you did for our children?" Clara couldn't speak. She could only nod and blink away tears. The Duke found her later in the library, composing herself. "You did this," he said quietly. "You built something so valuable that people won't let it die." "We did this," Clara corrected. "I couldn't have survived the court without you. You would have found a way. You always do." He hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This arrived from the licensing board. The preliminary application was approved. They're sending an inspector next month." Clara took the envelope, her hand steady despite the enormity of what it represented. Official recognition, legitimacy, everything she'd fought for. "There's something else," the Duke said, and his tone made her look up sharply. "Victoria is contesting the ruling. She's filed an appeal claiming the judge was biased by public pressure." Of course she was. Clara should have expected this. Can she win? Pemberton says it's unlikely, but it could delay the licensing process. Maybe indefinitely. He met her eyes. "She's not going to stop, Clara. Not until she's destroyed this completely." "Then we make it impossible to destroy." Clara stood, her decision crystallizing. "We don't just get licensed, we become so essential, so integrated into this community that shutting us down would cause a public outcry Victoria can't withstand." "How?" "We expand. Not just students, but programs. We offer adult literacy classes. We partner with local businesses to provide apprenticeships. We prove we're not just educating children, we're transforming an entire region's economic future." The Duke smiled, and it was fierce with pride. "When do we start?" They started immediately. Clara organized evening classes for adults who'd never learned to read. The Cambridge mathematician established a partnership with a local engineering firm, creating an apprenticeship program for older students. The doctor's widow opened a free clinic one day a week, teaching students practical medicine while serving the community. Within a month, 200 people were involved with the school in some capacity. Within 2, that number doubled. The inspector arrived on a cold February morning. Mr. Edmund Blackwell was younger than Sir Edmund, with sharp eyes and a skeptical expression. He spent 3 days examining everything: facilities, curriculum, teaching methods, student progress. Clara watched him interview Margaret, who now assisted with teaching younger children. She watched him observe Thomas working through advanced calculus with the Cambridge mathematician. She watched him tour the clinic, the workshop, the expanded library. On the 3rd evening, he requested a private meeting with Clara. "Lady Whitmore, I'll be honest. I came here expecting to find a well-intentioned disaster, unqualified teachers, inadequate facilities, students overwhelmed by material beyond their capacity." Clara's stomach tightened. "And instead?" "Instead, I found the most effectively organized educational institution I've ever inspected." He pulled out his notes, flipping through pages of observations. "Your student-to-teacher ratio is better than Eton. Your curriculum is more rigorous than half the grammar schools in England. Your facilities are clean, safe, and well-maintained, and your students—" He shook his head in apparent disbelief. "Your students are thriving in ways that shouldn't be possible given their backgrounds." "Why shouldn't it be possible?" Clara asked quietly. "Intelligence isn't determined by birth. Given proper instruction and opportunity, these children can achieve anything." "I'm beginning to believe you're right." Blackwell closed his notebook. "I'm recommending full licensure, and I'm going to suggest to the board that they study your methods for potential implementation elsewhere." Clara felt the floor shift beneath her. "You're serious?" "Completely. England is falling behind in education. We need more schools like this, not fewer. What you've built here, it's the future, Lady Whitmore, whether the aristocracy likes it or not." After he left, Clara stood alone in the library, trembling with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They'd done it. Against every obstacle, every enemy, every prediction of failure, they'd won. The Duke found her there, and she turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "We're licensed," she managed, "officially, legally, permanently." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Clara stiffened in surprise, then relaxed into the embrace, letting herself accept comfort for the first time in longer than she could remember. "You magnificent, stubborn, impossible woman," he murmured against her hair. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected again, pulling back to look at him. And for the first time she really saw him, not as the Duke who'd humiliated her, not as the benefactor who'd funded her school, but as James, a man who'd transformed himself as completely as she had, who'd chosen to fight beside her when he could have walked away. "James," she said, testing his given name, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I've been afraid. Of this. Of you. Of what it might mean if I admitted that somewhere along the way you stopped being my enemy and became—" She struggled for words. "Became essential. Not to the school, but to me." His eyes darkened with emotion. "Clara, I'm not finished." She took a breath. "I don't know if I love you. I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of trust after everything that's happened. But I know that when you're not here, I miss you. When you're here, I'm better, sharper, braver, more myself than I've ever been. And I think I'd like to find out if that could become love. If you're willing to be patient while I figure it out." James cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I've been patient for 5 years. I can be patient for 5 more, or 50, or however long you need. Because you're right. I'm not the man I was when I humiliated you. You changed me. You showed me what it means to build something real, to fight for something beyond yourself. And yes, I love you. I've loved you since I watched you scrub floors alongside servants, since I heard you defend your students to Sir Edmund, since I saw you walk into that courtroom ready to lose everything rather than compromise your principles." "That's terrifying," Clara whispered. "I know, but it's also true." She kissed him then, a tentative, careful kiss that tasted of salt and possibility. When they pulled apart, both of them were shaking. "I'm still not ready," Clara said, "for marriage, for promises, for anything permanent." "I know. But I'd like you to stay. Keep helping with the school. Keep being someone I can trust." "I'm not going anywhere," James promised. 3 months later, the official license arrived. With it came a letter from the Education Board requesting that Clara submit a detailed report on her teaching methods for review and potential publication. Another letter came from a school in Manchester asking if she'd consult on establishing a similar program there. The school's impact was spreading, rippling outward in ways Clara had never anticipated. But the sweetest victory came from an unexpected source. Victoria appeared one spring morning, her carriage pulling up to the school without warning. Clara was in the garden with a group of younger students, teaching them botany, when the butler informed her of the visitor. "I'll see her," Clara said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Margaret, continue the lesson. Identify 5 different types of leaves and sketch them in your notebooks." She found Victoria in the drawing room, looking diminished somehow. The widow's weeds were gone, replaced by a dove-gray dress that drained color from her face. She stood when Clara entered, her composure fragile. "Clara, thank you for seeing me. Did I have a choice?" "You could have had me turned away. I wouldn't have blamed you." Victoria's hands twisted together nervously. "I came to... I don't know why I came exactly. To see it, I suppose, to see what I tried so hard to destroy." "And what do you see?" Victoria looked around the room, at the books lining the shelves, the student artwork on the walls, the evidence of thriving life everywhere. "I see that I was wrong about everything." Clara waited. "The appeal failed," Victoria continued. "My lawyers advised me to drop it. The public sentiment, the newspaper coverage, the court's ruling, there was no path to victory. But more than that," she met Clara's eyes, and there was something broken in her expression. "I've spent the last 6 months watching you become exactly what I was always too afraid to be. Independent, purposeful, respected for something beyond your appearance or your connections. And I realized that destroying you wouldn't fix my own emptiness. It would just confirm it." "So you're here for absolution," Clara said flatly. "No. I'm here to admit I was cruel, petty, and wrong. I'm here to tell you that I wasted years of my life trying to tear you down because I couldn't bear to build myself up. And I'm here to ask Victoria's voice cracked. I'm here to ask if there's any way I might contribute something to what you're doing. Not for forgiveness, because I don't deserve that, but because I'm tired of being useless. Clara studied her stepmother, this woman who'd made her life miserable for so long. She should refuse, should send Victoria away, let her stew in the consequences of her choices. But then she thought about James, about how he'd transformed himself, about second chances and the possibility of growth. Can you teach? Clara asked. Victoria blinked. I speak French. I play piano. I know etiquette and household management. Etiquette and household management could be useful. Many of our older female students are seeking positions as governesses or household managers. They need those skills. Clara paused. But if you come here, you come as a teacher, not as Lady Whitmore. You'll work alongside women from all classes. You'll take direction from me and from other instructors. You'll be judged by what you contribute, not who you are. I understand. And if you use this as some attempt to undermine the school or reassert control over my life, I will personally throw you out. Are we clear? Perfectly clear. Clara nodded slowly. Then you may stay, on a trial basis. Prove yourself useful and we'll discuss something more permanent. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't experienced one of Margaret's Latin recitations. They're rigorous. It was a small joke, carefully offered. Victoria smiled tremulously, accepting the olive branch for what it was. Over the following months, Victoria did prove herself useful. She was exacting, demanding, and occasionally insufferable. But she was also effective. Her etiquette classes prepared students for positions in households across England. Her French lessons opened doors to international opportunities. And slowly, grudgingly, she earned respect from the other teachers, and even the students. She would never be warm, but she could be valuable. And that, Clara decided, was enough. Summer arrived, bringing with it a letter that changed everything again. The Education Board had approved funding for 3 additional schools modeled on Clara's program, in Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds. Each would need a director, teachers, and organizational structure. They're asking you to expand, James said, reading over her shoulder, to replicate what you've built here across England. It's too fast, Clara protested. We're barely managing 1 school. How can we oversee 4? You train others to do what you do. You create a system that can function without your direct oversight. You build something bigger than yourself. Clara looked at him, at his steady confidence in her abilities. You make it sound simple. It won't be. But neither was surviving in Northumberland alone. Neither was facing the Court of Chancery. Neither was transforming a burned stable into a thriving school in 6 months. You've done impossible things before, Clara. You'll do them again. She wanted to argue, but looking around at the school, at students bent over books in the library, at teachers leading discussions in the classrooms, at the garden where children learned botany alongside mathematics, she saw that he was right. This was bigger than her now. It had become a movement. I'll need help, she said. Real help. Not just you, but an entire administrative structure. Teachers, directors, financial managers. I know people. So does Lady Pemberton. So does Lady Catherine. James smiled. You're not alone anymore, Clara. You've built a community. Let them help you build an empire. The word empire felt too grand, too ambitious. But over the next year, that's exactly what Clara built. The Manchester School opened in September, with Lady Catherine as director. Birmingham followed in November, headed by the Cambridge mathematician. Leeds opened the following spring. Each school faced resistance. Each dealt with skeptical inspectors, hostile local aristocracy, and public suspicion. But they persevered, using Clara's model, integration with the community, demonstrable results, unwavering commitment to quality education regardless of students' backgrounds. By the second year, enrollment across all 4 schools exceeded 1,000 students. By the third year, Parliament was debating a National Education Act based partly on Clara's methods. And by the 5th year, when Clara stood before a packed assembly hall in London to receive recognition from the Queen herself for services to education, she looked out at the audience and saw faces she'd never imagined would be there. Margaret, now 19, sat in the front row. She'd completed her education and was teaching at the Birmingham School, already training the next generation of instructors. Thomas Wright sat beside her, a scholarship student at Cambridge studying classical languages, proving that a fisherman's son could indeed master Latin. Lady Pemberton was there, along with 24 other women who'd volunteered and stayed, who'd found purpose in education after years of empty social performance. Victoria sat near the back, her expression complex but undeniably proud. And James sat closest to the stage, his eyes never leaving Clara's face, his love and pride radiating so clearly that half the room must have seen it. The Queen's representative read a lengthy commendation about transformative educational philosophy and service to the empire. Clara barely heard it. She was thinking about a girl who'd stood in a ballroom 5 years ago, dismissed as unworthy of even a dance, a girl who'd been sent away to disappear quietly. That girl was gone, erased, just as society had wanted. In her place stood a woman who'd built something that couldn't be erased. Schools across England, teachers she'd trained, students she'd educated, a movement that was changing how the entire country thought about education, opportunity, and human potential. When the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, James found her in a quiet corridor. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Surreal, overwhelming, terrifying." Clara looked at him. "Like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing the wind that was supposed to push me off is actually holding me up. You were always strong enough to fly. You just needed someone to stop weighing you down." "I needed to stop letting them," Clara corrected. "That was the real change. Not what they did, but what I chose to do about it." James took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I have a question, and you can say no. I'll understand completely. But I need to ask." Clara's heart stuttered. "What?" "Marry me. Not because you need my protection or my money or my title, not because society expects it, or because we've been working together for 5 years. Marry me because we're better together than apart, because you trust me now, and I've earned that trust, because somewhere in all this fighting and building and transforming, we fell in love." Clara looked at their joined hands, thinking about trust and transformation, thinking about how terrified she'd been of needing anyone, and how James had proven over and over that needing someone wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, as long as you chose the right person. "Yes," she said simply. James's eyes widened. "Yes? Did you think I'd say no? I thought you might need time to consider. I've had 5 years to consider. I know who you are now. I know what we've built together. I know that I want to keep building it, keep fighting, keep transforming the world with you beside me." Clara smiled. "So yes, James, I'll marry you." He kissed her there in the corridor, not caring who might see, not caring about propriety or scandal. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing, giddy with the impossibility of it all. The wedding was small, held at the Durham School's chapel, with students and teachers as witnesses. Margaret was Clara's attendant. Victoria, in a gesture that surprised everyone, played piano for the ceremony. When Clara walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, she passed by faces that represented her entire journey, from exile to triumph, from erasure to empire. And when she reached James, when she took his hand and spoke her vows, she meant every word. They held the reception in the school's garden, where students had planted flowers that now bloomed in wild profusion. There were no society luminaries, no political figures, no carefully curated guest list, just people who'd fought beside Clara, who'd believed in her vision, who'd helped build something real. As the sun set over the Durham hills, Clara stood with James on the terrace, watching students dance and teachers laugh, and parents celebrate the futures their children now had. "Do you ever think about that night?" James asked quietly. "The ball, the humiliation, what I said to you?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but not the way you think. I don't think about it with pain anymore. I think about it as the beginning, the moment when everything I thought I knew shattered, and I had to build myself new from the pieces. I destroyed you that night." "No, you destroyed who I was pretending to be, and that was the best thing that could have happened to me." She turned to face him fully. "If I'd been accepted that night, if you'd danced with me, if I'd married some minor lord and faded into comfortable obscurity, I would never have become this. I would never have built these schools, helped these students, changed these lives. I would have been safe and comfortable and utterly wasted. You're not angry anymore? I'm grateful. Clara took his hand. For the pain that made me strong, for the exile that taught me independence, for the fight that showed me what I was capable of, and for you, for having the courage to change, to grow, to become someone who could stand beside me instead of above me. James pulled her close, and they stood there as night fell and lanterns were lit across the garden as music played and voices rose in celebration. Clara thought about the girl she'd been, plain, unwanted, dismissed. That girl had believed her worth came from other people's approval, from meeting society's impossible standards, from making herself small enough to fit into the boxes they'd built for her. But the woman she'd become knew better, knew that worth came from what you built, from who you helped, from the courage to define yourself on your own terms. London had erased the girl Clara Whitmore, but from that erasure had come something they'd never expected, never imagined, never wanted. A woman who couldn't be erased, a woman who'd built an empire of education, who'd changed laws and minds and futures, who'd proven that the world's judgment was meaningless against the force of determined will. They'd called her plain, they'd called her worthless. They'd dismissed her as unworthy of even a dance. And now, standing in the garden of a school that bore her name, surrounded by hundreds of lives she'd transformed, married to a man she'd taught to be better, Clara understood the final truth of her journey. She was never plain, they just didn't know how to see. But they saw her now. All of England saw her now. And they would remember. Not the girl they'd erased, but the woman they could never forget. Because she'd done the impossible. She'd taken their cruelty and turned it into strength. She'd taken their rejection and built acceptance. She'd taken their dismissal and created an empire. And in doing so, she'd proven that the only opinion that mattered was her own. The music swelled, the lanterns glowed, and Clara Whitmore, teacher, founder, revolutionary, wife, smiled at the future she'd built from the ashes of the past, knowing that this was just the beginning. There were more schools to open, more students to teach, more lives to change, more battles to fight and victories to win. And she would face them all with the same stubborn determination that had brought her this far, refusing to disappear, refusing to be less, refusing to accept that any dream was impossible, because they'd tried to erase her once. And look what happened instead.